More castles!
Where did they build their castles in, eh? Where? Where?
In the hands of kings!
Oh. Oh, okay. Yeah, alright. Fair enough.
Back! Amorphis! Amorphis! Amorphis!
Queens of Time or some shit, right? Yeah, fucking oath. Alright, so these bloody fins, they're signed to Nuclear Blast Records. It's their 13th studio album as well. And funnily enough, the first I've listened to. It's hard to fully encapsulate just what genres they are blending together on this album, as there are hints of power and doom and post and symphonic and sludge and death and progressive metal littered throughout, not to mention maybe even a hint of gent with some of the melodies in the clean vocals. The gent influence is most notable in how every song here is built around off-kilter grooves almost without exception. Take Daughter of Hate, in how the passages with the clean vocals could have easily been backed by an acoustic or folk or any of the brass bloody embellishments they otherwise use, but instead they utilize those thick breeds of polyrhythmic chugs, and I fucking love that they're a constant here. It just adds a groove to every fucking song, mate. Daughter of Hate, though, is quite obviously a standout track here besides, and not just for that sax played by Jorgen Mankeby, with its oddly squelched tone. It's actually how naturally the song progresses from groove to groove, with the final climax wielding all the power together with real meaning and impact. Not to mention, this is one of the rare moments on this record where I feel like the cleans add a melodic component to the song, which I actually wholeheartedly enjoy. Now, Message of Amber, the song prior, showcases their genre-bending fucking proficiency as it infuses one of the most pronounced displays of European slash folk slash Viking tinged metal on the album, yet contains textures as diverse as a vocoder, seemingly a whole choir as well, and not to mention the fucking bass work from Nicholas Etelevuri, fucking I got that right, is distinguishable and superb. But don't get it twisted, there are progressions entirely devoid of the folk influences, with some spiraling solos and infectiously wrong death growls in the midpoint, showing their insistence for their trademark melodic tinge of metal. And yeah, speaking of bass work, it's consistently great all over this album, but no more apparent than on fucking The Golden Elk, especially in the chorus where it remains discernible and a standalone element despite still underlying those jagged guitar leads whirling over the top. There are even orchestral strings dancing about in the midpoint of this track, yet the band shows great self-restraint in only introducing them to then lead in to that elegantly played and produced acoustic with bloody vocals adding to the melody in a perfect way. Which brings me to the point of indulgence in there being almost none on this record. None. Fucking progressive metal? No indulgence? They showcase a real talent for hand selecting the tastiest chord progressions and then pairing them with complementing production, and yet never jam-packing the album with thrash beats and solos which take away from the grooves. It's what they're all about, these fucking grooves. I mean, it's everything to the music, and I love how dedicated they are to that fucking style of songwriting. It's just Groove City, boys! Because there is always the danger of overusing the ambitious brass and orchestral and symphonic and other esoteric elements, yet the band shows their class, skill and experience by letting the grooves breathe and speak on their own, only incorporating them so as to freshen up and diversify the soundscapes explored. I mean, the instrumental palette here is seemingly inexhaustible, just like me, with flutes and organs and saxophones and synths and violins and keys and pianos and whatever fucking else banging about, making the album an embarrassment of riches, boys. And because they work these elements in so tastefully, they don't jar or buck against the grooves or genres explored, generally speaking. Instead, they feel like newly belted chords to their songwriting, like individual cogs revolving around the idler wheel of their fucking typified grooves. Some of their cleans are reminiscent of a lot of modern metal, like I was saying before, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way, but yet again, they are an element which is not overused. Oh! They even succeed in sounding like mastodons at one point on a song like Wrong Direction, which relies on them melodically and not necessarily to its benefit. Mind you, that song, it did grow on me. It did, like a fucking grass blade, if I was like just a patch of dirt. As for the reasons why I'm not head over heels about them, their natural timbre just doesn't grab me most of the time. It's rough around the edges and missing a convincing range, especially on that song. They just don't go up and down many notes, yet they're not even bad. That's the thing. I mean, in the grand scheme of metal, these are just passable. And Tommy's death growls, on the other hand, they're some of the best I've heard, and that's mostly because of his ability to enunciate words without sacrificing too much of that guttural intensity. I mean, you could point to any song here as a standout in terms of the fucking death growls because they're that consistent, but Grain of Sand remains to be one of the best examples despite the unfortunate contrast between them and the cleans. But it isn't just the growls that make this track pop either, for it contains one of the best instrumental breakdowns on the album with sprawling leads coloring the soundscape with delicious arpeggiated goodness. Not to mention the opening passage with that guitar there has this delightfully Eastern or even Arabic tinge to it, which I really loved. But just to have those death growls as an ever-present, impactful layer to be unleashed makes the album so much more convincing. There are even some more surprises tacked away along the way, take amongst stars right off the posterior of this album, being one of the only sustained moments with female vocals delivered by Anneke van Giersberg, and they form a perfect contrast here, yet crucially, again, aren't overused at all. And yeah, speaking of surprises, We Are Cursed has this opening flute motif, which is then deliciously fleshed out with this triumphant power metal guitar lead. Mind you, this song feels way too familiar, like a Nightwish song I might have reacted to with that same guitar lead there, maybe The Greatest Show on Earth, I can't quite remember, but yeah. Now, despite the overwhelming instrumental diversity as well as the soundscapes and genres explored, some of the song structures are pointedly similar, and not just for their backboarding of infectious grooves. And that's how every song here progresses like summits climbed, with no shortage of attention to detail and how they rephrase the motifs toward their very climaxes. It all just seems too intuitive to them somehow, and the proficiency of the melodies provided by the guitarist in particular. And I haven't even gone into the drummer and how precise and well ordered his work is on the kit. Not to mention, it's also quite a detailed album lyrically and conceptually, something I haven't even touched on at all, nor felt the need to, such as their consistency and how many aspects and elements there are to pull and unpack. So yeah, I can't quite do all of their instrumentals justice and every aspect for that matter, but I'm not exactly fucking Batman now, am I? But I'll just chuck this, chuck it, yeah. Oh, fuck. I don't know, a cheeky, I haven't even thought about it, 4.4 boys, 4.4. I'll leave it at that. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I mean, I didn't even bring up Pyres on the Coast, the fucking closer here. I mean, that contains one of the tastiest riffs on the album as well, and pretty much succeeds outright for that reason alone. But anyway, you get the point, right? This is just a superb bloody metal album, and you should just listen to it. Like, yeah, some of the cleans aren't the greatest, but they're still good. And, their proficiency in songwriting is just superb. And, yeah, a couple lows in the track listing, maybe one or two, but pretty much just consistently great. So just have a good one, mate. Have a good one. Too easy. Real. I appreciate new subscribers. I do. Yes.